Hey, everybody. So it seems like it's a pretty good retreat. I wish that we had things like this where I'm from, but it's great. If you've read my bio, I have a very strange bio: art and medicine and business. And so most of what I'm going to talk about today is about my experience as a researcher in medicine and working as a consultant for over 200 hospitals across the country, which sort of begs the question, why should you care? What difference does it make? What does medicine have that it can teach law? So I thought the most fun way to do this would be to start with a game show with absolutely no prizes and nothing to win, nothing at stake. So what I'm going to do, the game show is called Doctor or Lawyer. And I'm going to ask a series of questions, and what I want you to do by either just calling out or raising your hand, which do you think this applies to? So who do you think works longer hours? Lawyer? Lawyers? Doctors? Show of hands, lawyers. Show of hands, doctors. All right, the lawyers win that particular round. The reason for this is in 2011 they passed a rule that decided that no one is a better doctor after 36 hours without sleep. And so they made people have to leave the hospital after a while. Apparently no one has given any thought to whether anyone's a better lawyer after 36 hours without sleep. All right, who has the highest average salary, doctors or lawyers? You know this one, right? To the penny. Show of hands, lawyers. Only a few. Show of hands, doctors. Yes, it is doctors. But the highest, the top salaries for the top lawyers are higher than the highest top salaries for the top doctors. Both professions, and the reason I put this up is that both are very old professions. Both are very highly respected around the world, and they share a lot of other traits. So, for instance, which of the two requires years of grueling work in school and detailed knowledge of specialized subjects? Doctors, lawyers, both. Both, absolutely both. Which of the two are trained to be skeptics? Proof matters. Doctors, lawyers, or both? Both, absolutely both. Which of the two work on collaborative interdisciplinary teams when networking outside and networking inside are important? Doctors, lawyers, or both? Both. Clients aren't happy to see you usually. Both, absolutely both. What about expected to be in touch at all times? Get a BlackBerry? What about having to respond to outrageous client demands? It's both. It's absolutely both. What about when clients leave you? Why do they leave doctors? Why do they leave lawyers? Leave because they think that you're not responsive, or because they think the bills are too high? Doctors, lawyers, or both? Absolutely both. All right. You can spend years with a client building rapport, putting it in the bank, and then one thing goes wrong, you're back to square one. Doctors, lawyers, or both? Both. Absolutely both. Now, both these professions share a lot in common. Now, this one question is a little bit different. This is only one. Of the two professions, doctors or lawyers, which one do 95% of the practitioners think they're above average communicators? A show of hands, who thinks it's doctors? Show of hands, who thinks it's lawyers? It's actually doctors. Now my favorite, I think this is hysterical, because how bad are those other 5%, really? That they know, they're like, I'm not as good as most people. Now, when I was doing the research for this, I actually couldn't find any data on whether or not lawyers thought that they were above average. Turns out lawyers don't care about above average. 80% of them think that they're exceptional. We don't care about above average, it's exceptional. This was from a Law 360 article. Now, the interesting thing about both of this is that it tells me that neither doctors nor lawyers understand statistics. This is simply not possible. But there's another thing. This exceptional service, which is what we're talking about today, it's actually really interesting. Which of the two fields can actually measure what exceptional service means? Doctors or lawyers? Doctors. Let me explain what I mean by this. So in 2010, President Obama signed a law you may have heard of. It may have come up from time to time. And regardless of your politics around this issue, what you should know is that it had some very fundamental changes for my industry, for healthcare. And one of the major changes was that all hospitals, every single hospital in the country, was required to give out patient satisfaction scores. You'd go to the hospital, and afterwards you'd get a survey. How good was your time in the hospital? And that was tied to Medicare reimbursement rates. Every hospital had to achieve 80% of a high score. So you had to say, yeah, they did a great job. 80% of the patients had to say that. If 80% of the patients said that, the hospital got back 100% of their Medicare billing. If fewer said that, less than 80%, some of that billing was withheld. And if they were over 80%, they got a bonus, and still do get a bonus. What this means is it sets them up an incentive. Every hospital in the country has a swing of millions of dollars per year based on these scores. So how much do you think we track those suckers? We have lots and lots and lots of data about what works to improve those patient satisfaction scores. Again, we're talking about millions of dollars per hospital in this country. Why I'm here today is that doctors and lawyers, we share an awful lot of similarities in our professions. And in my world, we have hard data about what can help the client experience. Patient satisfaction and client satisfaction are exactly the same thing. So what I'm going to talk about today has a lot to do with medicine, but I'm going to translate that so that you can use those same tools because they're proven to work. And here's the kicker. They cost nothing. So I have 3 points today. My first point is that client experience is a remembered event. It doesn't take place in real time. It takes place after the fact. Let me explain what I mean by this. So I'm going to tell you 2 stories. Let's say that one year I have to take my wife out for her anniversary, our anniversary. My wife's not here, right? All right, so it's our anniversary dinner. And this may or may not be a true story, by the way. And I've forgotten that it's our anniversary. So at the last minute, I go, we got to go somewhere, and I can't get any good tables anywhere, so we end up going to the Ponderosa Steakhouse. All right, so on a scale of awful to really good, we're going to track my wife's satisfaction over the course of the evening. So this is awful to very good, and this way on this axis is how well it works. So we start out, it's not great, but it's not the worst, like we're not at McDonald's. But we get in the restaurant, and it is worse than I thought. It's a little dirty, and there's kind of some scuzzy people there, and so her satisfaction starts to go down. But out of sheer willpower and dint of my amazing personality, I managed to turn it around, and it starts to be an okay evening. It's going up. And then the kid at the table behind us throws up. And her satisfaction's plummeting back down again. And I'm like, oh my God. So I turn that stuff around. I turn on the charm, we move, and I'm like, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean any of this. And by the end of the evening, I managed to get us back to about where we started when we first came in the restaurant. Right? So this was her satisfaction over the course of that. Now the next day, if her friend said, hey, how was your anniversary date? On a scale of great to awful, how would she score me? She was like, it's fine. I mean, he forgot again. Low expectations, very important. You know, all right, it wasn't so bad. Now the next year, I was determined to do this better. So I went, got us great table, great place, all planned out, started high. Then I even had taken some dancing lessons. We went dancing. And her satisfaction started to go down a little bit because she's like, what's going on? Is he having an affair? I don't understand what's happening here. And I turned that around, went back up, and now I'm doing everything right. The whole rest of the evening, I'm doing everything right. It's going perfectly. And then, at the end of the evening, waitress walks by with a check. Cute waitress. And I went like this. She said, were you looking at her butt? I was like, I was not looking at her butt. You were looking at her butt. Oh, I totally did not. And we started fighting. Little fight. And then, with a kicker, the end of the fight, I said, you're just like your mother. All right. Again, this may or may not be a true story. All right. So this is the graph of that, right? The reason that it doesn't go down below 0 is I couldn't make the software do that because it was really, turns out that was not a good idea. Now, the next day, though, the evening actually went pretty well until the end. The next day, when her friend said, how was your anniversary? What do you suppose she said? Awful. Worst ever. Oh my God, he ruined it. It was just terrible. Now, this is fascinating because an economist will tell you in absolute terms that second anniversary was twice as good as the first anniversary. Absolutely. Now, I made this graph. Turns out, making a graph to explain to your wife that her rating scale is wrong is not a great idea. I don't recommend you do that. But for our purposes, this is interesting, right? How come One event, even though it's twice as good, is rated worse than the other. What makes the difference? You remember things. You remember things. Anchor points. It's after the event. There are these little anchor points. And it turns out those anchor points are the key to client experience. It doesn't happen in real time. It happens right after the event. How first impressions, hugely important. Last impressions, hugely important. Little memorable moments. Kid threw up behind you. He went dancing. Said I was just like my mother. Those moments are the things that are remembered, and it turns out to be all the difference in the world between client expectation. Let me tell you a story about how we did this in the hospital. What your job is to create these memorable examples. What we had is we had doctors hand out business cards. You guys probably hand out business cards. Doctors normally don't hand out business cards. That sheer act of just making a human connection started to make a difference. Then we started tweaking that a little bit. We had the doctors put their personal cell number on their cards. And a lot of doctors were like, I am totally not going to do that. But of the ones that did, their scores went up. And here's the thing that I like most. How often do you think people called? They didn't call. It was the sheer act of knowing I could get in touch with you that mattered. Now, who here has business cards? Does anyone have your personal cell number on your business cards? Okay, that's great. That's great. But here's another thing that we learned. If it's already on the card, everybody gets that card. You're not special when you hand the card. So here's what you do. You take the card. Next time you see somebody, you say, hey, here's my card. Wait a minute, here's my cell number. You take out a pen, you say, here's my cell number. But wait, you turn it over. You say, here's the direct line for my assistant. Or if you need to get in touch with me and you can't get in touch with me, here's my colleague's direct number. Here's how you get in touch with me. And you hand that to them. All of a sudden, what you've done is you've created an incredibly memorable moment. It's special. They're not just one of the crowd. They're somebody special. You personally wrote on there and handed it. Now, if you learn nothing else from me today, and that is entirely possible, I promise you, take your business card when you hand it to clients, give them something special on your business card. It will create one of these moments that will make you stand out from the crowd just a little bit. And here's the great part. How much does that cost you? Nothing. It costs you nothing. And I have data that shows that this absolutely works. Now, second point, day-to-day conversations. One of the things that you do most of the time is you talk. When you talk to people, it's something that you've got to do. Now, in the hospital, we have certain types of conversations that are unpleasant. Breaking bad news to people, difficult conversations. You have difficult conversations with clients a lot. We have awful ones. Just absolutely terrible things happen in the hospital. So we spend a lot of time studying these types of conversations. What works, what doesn't work to connect people. And the interesting thing is, it turns out that difficult conversations are not any structurally different than regular conversations. It's just that the stakes are so high that any mistake can make the entire thing fall apart. What happens is, in the absence of information, people read into it their fears. And this is important to know. In the absence of information, people will fill in their fears. If your clients don't hear from you, they're going to assume you're not thinking about them. Now, let me explain what I mean by this. In the absence of information, people have their fears. One of the first times that I was ever in surgery, and I'm not a medical doctor, by the way, I'm a PhD, but I've been in surgery to help observe and do some other things. And I walked out, and I'd never done it before. You walk out of surgery, and there's some doors, and you walk into the waiting room, and there's patients in the waiting room. What does every patient do when you walk out of those doors? They look at you. Are you the one? Are you the person? Everybody's there reading. The stakes are so high that they're looking for any sign. Now, if I were an evil person, you could do this. You could walk out and go, find somebody and go, right? That one moment, you're laughing because all I did was sigh. But that would communicate to somebody. They would go, oh my God, something's happening. It's because in the absence of information, people fill in their fears. These conversations, difficult conversations, are no different than any other conversation structurally. It's just that the stakes are so high. So we came up with ways of explaining how to think about these conversations. This is a structure. Medical educators, I'm a medical educator, and we love acronyms. So pre-spikes is the way that we talk about how to have a bad news conversation. It turns out that this is actually the formula for thinking about all different conversations. Because we're not doctors, because we're lawyers, I want to talk through the parts that are going to be most important for you. So the first two acronyms here are pre and setting. The pre is the moment before you have a conversation with somebody. Just do this. Hi. What that does is it allows you to be in this moment rather than bringing things from going on. Just simply take a breath and engage in the conversation as if it's a new conversation. It's not that hard. Setting is even more important. So for instance, if I have a relationship talk with my wife in front of a roaring fire in Aspen, that goes pretty well for me usually. But if I have those same words, say the same things, and we're in a car behind a Kmart parking lot, it just isn't quite the same. It's not as romantic. Turns out that this is true in your client business as well. When you are talking to a client, where you are matters. Are you in an office? Are you getting drinks? Are you on a golf course? The environment makes a big difference in terms of bonding. But there's something even more important, and that is in the room itself. So let's say that we got in a room. Where are you in relationship to the other people? And there's a science behind this called proxemics. And the easiest way for me to explain this will be with two volunteers. I have two volunteers. Yes, ma'am. Anyone else? One more volunteer. All right, come on up here. All right, so we're going to have a series of conversations. Thank you very much. Come on up. Give them a hand. They're braver than you are. Hi, Jennifer, Aaron, come on up. And you are? Josh, come on up. So do me a favor, have a seat on either end of this table. And we're going to have, now, we're going to go ahead and set up a series of things. We'll let one of them be the supervisor and one of the employee. Who should be who? Supervisor, clearly down here. All right, here's your line. We need to talk about your performance. That's it. Wait. So we've set the stage. We're proximally seated at a table. Just say we need to talk about your performance. And freeze. End of scene. Give him a round of applause. Yeah, that was great. All right. How's this conversation going for him? It's not so great. It's funny too. We do this in the movies. We set a really long table between people, and they have, pass the salt. What? And what's happening is they're seated in what we call the competitive relationship. This is where you would sit two rival warlords negotiating a peace treaty, because they can see each other, they can't get to each other. Now, the keys to this proximally are important. It's that both their eyes can see each other, their shoulders, their hips, and their feet are square in opposition this way, right? Competitive relationship. Now, something's interesting. This thing, the length of this, is just the level of formality. The more stuff, the more formal. The less stuff, the less formal. Have you ever been to a restaurant and you were seated at a booth? Did you feel particularly competitive? You were fine. Just scoot back a second. Just going to move the table this way. It's too wide. Oh, does it fit? Oh. Okay, don't move too much. Will you scoot up a little bit? We're going to have our same conversation. Here's your piece of paper. Here's his performance report. Try it again. And scene. All right. Is this any better? Moderately. Now, there's less stuff between them, so we're not like in a Batman movie where we're trying to establish that they're completely out of touch. But technically, we're still in a competitive relationship. There's something between us, shoulders, arms, faces, all that stuff. The feet are pointed directly across from each other. The relationship is one of antagonism. Now, they are close enough to be able to gaze into each other's eyes. So your line is, I've always loved you. You don't actually have to say it. You're good. Oh, okay. And action. Oh, it's perfect. That's perfect. By the way, not the best thing to do at a performance review. Or maybe it is. I don't know. Now, this relationship, though, is still, we've taken some of the formality out of it, but it's still technically a competitive relationship. It is still one of antagonists across the table. Now, this is a great place to sit if you deliberately want to set up an antagonistic relationship. Let's say you're working with a rival team of lawyers. Absolutely sit in this way. If you're trying to build rapport with a client, this is not necessarily the best way to sit. Let me try a different one. We guys scoot back so that I can move the table. And I'm going to have you sit facing this way. All right. So I want you to sit facing straight, like you were driving a car. Okay. So same thing. We need to talk about your performance. All right, and scene. How's this one going? Moderately better? Different. It's fundamentally different. This one, pay attention to where their feet are. Hips, shoulders, feet, they're in parallel. They're pointed in this direction. They're not intersecting each other. One of the interesting things, there was a study that was done that took a look at two people sitting around a table, and they had a clicker in their hand, and they were like, is paying attention to me, is not paying attention to me. Paying attention, not paying attention. Paying attention, not paying attention. And they would shift in their seats as the course went on. It turned out the thing that was most highly correlated with paying attention to me is where their feet were pointed. If their feet are pointed towards each other, they're paying attention. Their feet here are interesting because they're in parallel lines. They're not actually in a relationship with each other proximally. They're in a relationship with the facts. This is actually, it's called the cooperative position. This is a great way to sit if you want to deal with the facts and not the person. Maybe you're friends. Maybe you really do love her. And she needs to talk about, all right, let's take our friendship off the table. Let's just talk about this thing. Now, in this, I'm going to sell you a car for a second. Okay, stand up for a second. The worst salesmen in the world do this a lot. Hi, how are you doing? Take a look at that car. Do you see that car? Can you see yourself in that car? Has anyone ever had a salesman do this to you? Yes? The reason they do that is because it works. You're on the same side of an issue on the other side. This is not a bad way to work with clients sometimes. Thank you. You're going to buy the car? It's a nice car. No, I think that's Now, competitive, facing this way. Cooperative, in this direction. What if, let me scoot back just a second, and then sit on the, just stay where you are, if you'll sit on the corner. Mm-hmm. We need to talk about your performance. How's this one working? This one's better. This one's called the corner position. It's also sometimes called the rapport position for exactly this reason. Because what's happened is if you take a look at their feet, they're not opposing each other. They're not in this direction. They're overlapping, which means that they are sharing a task, but they are also talking with each other just a little bit. Do me a favor and stand up for a second. If you notice people, pay attention to people in coffee shops. Just stand right here for a second. No one, friends, so turn towards me. Friends don't talk to each other like this. How you doing? Good? Did you like that coffee? You having a good time? They talk, they stand ever so slightly like this. You'll notice a group of people that are standing around. If somebody wants to join the conversation, people have to move to allow them in. This corner position is how people sit or stand most of the time. It is a nice open way to be able to look but not be right in somebody's face. The cooperative position, corner position. Now there's one more. Do me a favor, let's see. So, now I'm going to be the creepy guy, you can watch. So, let's assume that you are at a cafeteria table, and you're eating, and I have a tray, and you don't know me, and I walk in and sit down. We don't know each other. Where do I sit? Do I sit right here? Hi. Do I sit in the corner position? Do I sit over there, right next to her? I don't sit next to her. If I sit here, where do I sit? On this corner, far away? No, right here. Okay. This is the only acceptable place to sit. It's called the independent position. What's happening is, so even if I sit here, my eye line is still in her space. I can still stare at her creepily. By sitting here, we imagine that there's an imaginary wall between us. This is my world and this is your world. That works very, very well. Now, the problem with the independent position, do me a favor and sit here. The problem with the independent position is that a lot of people's offices are set up this way. In the hospital, it's a huge deal because if you've ever been in an exam room, there's a little island where the patient sits, and there's a computer screen on the other side where they sit, so that the patient's world and the doctor's world are two separate worlds. How your office is set up turns out to make an awful lot of difference in how clients perceive you. Do you have things independently? Do you have them where you can sit in a corner? Are you going to be sitting across the desk from them? All these things matter. Now, there's one other thing. I'm going to build rapport with you. Would you do me a favor and scoot over this way? I'm going to do everything right. Stand here. And just stand up. I want you, no, you sit. You're good, you're good. So stand here. Stand in a corner position. So stand. Keep your body open. Lean in a little bit. Smile. Okay, building rapport. So he's doing everything the textbooks say to build good rapport. How's this working? It's really kind of creepy. Now, why? Why is it a little creepy? Besides that it's him. So one thing is he's a little too close. A little bit too close. Now, proximity, how close you are to somebody, it turns out that this is cultural. All the other things that we've talked about are shared by mammals, but proximity is cultural. So for instance, if you've ever been on a New York subway and someone's like right here, you're like, that's fine. But you can be in Montana and somebody can be 100 yards away and that guy be like, he's too close. So the relationship, the cultural relationship of space is important, but also, even more important in this situation, look at the level of his eye line in comparison to the level of her eye line. Now, all mammals share these things, and all mammals have evolved to know that something whose eye line is higher than us is either dominant or a potential threat. Now, those of us who, your ancestors who didn't recognize this were killed and didn't spread their genes. All of our ancestors remembered this. So one of the ways to build rapport is really simple, is to lower your eye line to the eye line of the other person. So just by sitting. Sitting also does something interesting. There's a number of studies that show that if a doctor comes in and just stands, let's say they stand for 8 minutes and then they walk out, the patient will perceive that they were in there for 5 minutes. If the doctor comes in and sits for 8 minutes, the patient will perceive that they were there for 10 to 15 minutes. Just by dint of sitting down matters. But it's not the sitting down, it's the eye line that matters. There's another important thing. If he needed to give her status, if he needed her to think it was her idea, watch what happens if he leans in, and just lean in and let your eye line go down a little bit. Just simply lean in, you're good, that's it. So if you said, what do you think of this? That's good. If you say, what do you think of this while leaning down, it actually subconsciously gives the other person status, and they will, in the medical terms, they'll have a higher rate of compliance. They are more likely to do what you suggested if they think it was their idea. Now, these things, thank you very much for your hand, it was help, by the way. One last thing. Proxemics, competitive, cooperative, corner, independent. I said that they were universally shared by all mammals, and I challenge you to test that. And here's how I want you to test that. So do me a favor and stand up and pretend you're in an elevator. In any elevator in the world, if you break these rules, you will know it. So let's say that they're in an elevator and I get in and I stand in the competitive relationship. That's a weird elevator ride, right? What if I stand here? Also, weird elevator ride. There's only two places you're allowed to stand in an elevator. In the cooperative position, we're just sharing, we're waiting for the light to change. Or in the independent, where you slightly turn away. Now, the reason that that's true across the world is because these relationships are mammalian. They're not cultural. The distance you spend and whether or not you have your feet and all that sort of thing, those are cultural. But if you need to improve your patient's or your client experience, pay attention to where you are physically, proximally around them. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. These last numbers are important and they're a lot faster. In the 1970s, a guy named Alfred Morabian did some studies to try and determine the percentage of communication that was given off by body language versus tone of voice versus words, and these were the numbers he came up with. When studying people who are talking about emotion, 55% of communication came from body language, 38% came from tone of voice and what he called paralanguage, the little sounds that we make, and as little as 7% were the words. Now, this study is often misrepresented. A lot of people will say that all communication is 92% or 93% body language and tone of voice, and that is not true. He was studying conversations that had an emotional component. Now, for instance, if I'm trying to explain to you how to program your DVR, that is not 55% body language. Well, you push the button and the thing. The more technical the information, the more important word choice is. But these numbers hold true in terms of their potential to give information. What this means is that if you meet a client in person, you have 100% of your ability to communicate. Your communication can be clear, unambiguous, and you can control the signal. However, if all you have is a phone conversation, it means that you're only operating with 45% efficiency. And remember, in the absence of information, people fill in their fears. If they can't see you, your tone of voice and the words you use become even more important. And if you're giving something out by email, it means that you are as little as 7% efficient. It means that there is a 93% chance of misunderstanding. It doesn't mean that you can't do it, but it means that having a difficult or an intricate conversation with only the words puts you at a disadvantage, because in the absence of good information, people fill in their fears. That's why we had to invent those stupid little emoticons, right? You're fired. Just joking. The tone of voice. Now, this matters for when you have a conversation with your client. If it's a really important conversation, try and be there in person. If you can't be there in person, make absolutely sure that your tone of voice is good. Don't sit down when you're having that phone call. Stand up when you're having that phone call. You sound different when you're standing up. If you absolutely don't care about them, then just communicate with them by email. Then it doesn't matter, and they can misunderstand everything they want. Let's move on to the next two. Perception. Perception in my world is to ask before you tell. So before you break bad news to somebody, you say, what's your understanding about why your husband is here? You don't just tell the news. This is also true for you. If you see a client, don't just start talking to them about the facts. Ask them, how are you doing today? What's going on with you with the case? What you don't know is maybe they've been in your waiting room longer than they thought was appropriate, and they're really angry with you. And if you don't take a moment and say, what's going on, there's a good chance that even as you're explaining about all the good work you've done, what they're really thinking is, that sucker, he doesn't even care about me. So, just want a quick set. When you see a client, ask them how they're doing, ask them what their understanding is about what's going on. It's a way of checking in. This other one, immediate concerns. This deals with everything that we talked about earlier today, or that you were talking about earlier today. In the hospital, let's say that Mrs. Smith comes in with a broken leg. She's 80 years old, and she's in a lot of pain. I have to deal with that pain right away, or at a minimum say, I understand you're in pain, and as soon as I can, I'm going to get to that. Now for you, what happens when you're on vacation? If you're on vacation and a client writes to you, this is an immediate concern. They're in pain, they need something from you. If you're on vacation, you have to be able to send them a little email that says, hey, I got your information, I'm going to get to it right away. You don't have to deal with it right away, but you have to let them know that I'm going to deal with it right away. I want you to take two examples. Let's say that you have one of those out-of-office things set, right? I'm on the way from the office, I'm on vacation. They send you an email and they get that bounce back. They think, that bastard's on vacation, they don't care about me. But if you get that email and you just write them back a quick note and says, hey, I'm on vacation, I just wanted you to know I'm going to get to this right away, they're like, oh, you didn't have to write. You didn't have to do that. Instantly, you've turned what could be a bad anchor point into a good anchor point. He wrote me while he was on vacation. He cares enough about me. She's paying attention to me. These last ones, and this is the last thing at this point. Knowledge, empathy, and second touch. Knowledge in my field is clear, concise, and unambiguous. You say the word dead, you say the word cancer. When you're talking to patients, you should be clear, concise, and unambiguous. Use the words that don't talk around subjects. Empathy, we're terrible at measuring it, but one thing we do know is to allow for silence. Emotion is like a wave. Let it break. Has anyone in here ever worked in customer service? Yeah? Have you ever had anyone yell at you? Like they're in a bad mood? Have you ever tried to stop them in the middle of yelling? Like, hey, hold on just 1 second. No, it doesn't work very well. What you have to do is you have to recognize that emotion is a wave and you let it happen. You just let the emotion break and sometimes it goes away. People are if they're gonna have an outburst, let them have an outburst. Allow for the silence, allow it to go away, and say, I understand. That's really all there is to that. Now this next one, this is the one that's most important for you. Second touch. In the hospital, it turns out that doctors see patients mainly in the morning, early in the morning for about 8 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes. And then they go away and they work. But if the patient doesn't see them for the rest of the day, the patient perceives that the doctor wasn't there at all, that they only saw them for 8 minutes. What we did to increase patient satisfaction scores is we just had the doctors, as they were walking through the ward anyway, pop in and go, hey, Mrs. Smith, hi, I just wanted you to know that we got those tests off and I'll be letting you know in the morning. I'll see you. And then walking out again. All it did was it let the patient know that the doctor was still thinking about them. Now for you, you're going to want to do something similar. You're going to want to talk to your clients just a little, ping them just a little to let them know you're working. Now in business, a lot of people write handwritten notes. If you've bought a house, your mortgage broker probably sent you a handwritten note that said, hey, happy to have you on the team, looking forward to working with you. What that does is it shows it shows preference. It shows that you gave time, you gave thought to them. Now, I'm not entirely sure that handwritten notes or pinging your clients is the right thing to do for you. I do know that the science says you're going to want to have a way of touching base with them every once in a while, even if you have nothing new to tell them, just to let them know that you're thinking about them. And my challenge to you is to figure out what that is. And here's how I'm going to phrase this challenge. So, 28 years ago, I was in a wheelchair at Fort Bragg. They were going to amputate both of my legs. It was a really bad day. Flash forward. 15 years later, I'm in the hospital again, but this time I'm working with doctors and trying to improve patient satisfaction scores and trying to research and understand all that. Flash forward another few years, and I'm at the height of my career talking to Williams and Mullin and trying to communicate all these things. Now, I've worked with congressional clients, I've worked with Fortune 500 people, executives all over the world. What made the difference between the guy who's stuck in a wheelchair and the guy here? What makes that journey possible? Not everybody all at once. Intention. Intention is absolutely part of it. Intention and having a plan. Figuring out how to get from here to there. So the wheelchair happened this way. I was rock climbing, I was on active duty. A brick came out of the wall, and I turned and I fell, and it was 5 stories. Now, the thing about falling 5 stories is it's not how far, it's how fast you go. You can hear the wind going in your ears. And what I learned much later is that we're all falling, that speed. You just can't hear the wind rushing in your ears. Time is passing. But for me, it was passing very, very fast. And I hit the bricks, and my feet and legs exploded. The wounds were what were called open and comminuted, which means that the bones exploded and burst through the skin. They pulled me off the mountain. They said, we're going to have to helicopter you off here because you might die. And I thought, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to say that out loud, are you? Then we got to the hospital, and then they said, we're going to have to go into emergency surgery or you might die. And I was like, you guys really need to read a book or something because you're not supposed to say this. And then afterwards, I still had both my legs, but they said, we may still have to cut off your legs and you'll never walk again. And I said, yes, I will. But I had to figure out how to do it. So I had them put those little walking casts, those little rubber things, on both of my feet. And I had also broken my arm. And so I had a cane. And I would get out of bed every day, just a little bit. And I cracked 3 teeth in the back of my head. Spent a year in the wheelchair, getting to where I could walk again. And then after I got to walk again, the doctor said, that's amazing, but you'll never run again. And I said, thank you very much. I hate running. That is outstanding. Can I get that in writing? Like, can me not run? And just, you know, to be nice to them, I have not jogged since 1988. I don't know if you can tell. But after that, that plan got me out of the wheelchair, but it didn't get me where I needed to go. Got a new plan, got a doctorate, got a job, got a new plan, started working in the hospital, changing careers, got a new plan, worked and worked and worked and worked until I got to a place where I had information that I could share with the rest of the world. Now, the important point is that every journey there required a new and different plan. And here's the thing. All of you have already climbed many mountains. Hopefully you haven't fallen off. All of you are in and out of law school. You have good jobs. You've got good clients. You're already in a good place. But what got you here won't get you there. You need a new plan to increase. If you want to actually have exceptional service, you need a new plan in place. Unless you're one of the 80% of people who think you already are exceptional, and maybe you're right. But my challenge to you is, what's your plan? This is the third point. Have a plan. Figure out how to put in place some of these little things. So I covered a lot of stuff. I'm trying not to spend too much time because I know you want to have more fun, but the challenge here is, so what? You listened to me. You thought, oh, that's great, that's clever, oh, that's very informative. So what? If you don't do anything about it, it ends here. What are you going to do? Are you one of the 80% who thinks you're already exceptional, who thinks your clients already think you're exceptional? I hope you're right, but there's quite a few of us in here that statistically that's not right, but you can make it so. Somebody sent me this meme 2 days ago, and I love it. They know that I talk about patient satisfaction. I know I talk about client stuff. The bottom line is, did you die? Now, when I used to work in the hospital, I would go in and I would go and they'd hire me to go talk about patient satisfaction scores. And I'd fly around and I'd go into a room and there'd be a bunch of surgeons sitting there, their arms crossed, and I'd say, so why do you think that I'm here today? And they said, mandatory meeting from corporate. And I was like, that's outstanding. That is absolutely what every speaker wants to start with. And I would say, well, that's interesting because I don't care about patient satisfaction scores. I care about making patients better. And they would all sit up and take notice. Because it's true, it doesn't matter. It's not about whether or not your clients think you're exceptional. It's about being exceptional and doing good work. Now, the thing about this is, doing good work is the game. Like, that's the crowd. Everybody does good work. That's the cost to play the game. But it does not set you apart from the crowd. The difference between good and great is this much. It's those little tiny things. Being good at your job is the baseline, and I hope you all are. But in order to have exceptional performance, if for your clients to think you're exceptional, you've got to be good and you have to create those little tiny moments. The beauty is it costs nothing. Now, here's the last story I want to tell you. So a few years ago, I worked for a hospital that shall remain nameless. They had brought us up to increase their patient satisfaction scores, and we put a lot of things in place, put a plan in place, and their patient satisfaction scores absolutely went up. And then they were acquired, bought out by a larger company who had their own training firm in place and a different way of doing things, and so they didn't renew the contract, and we left. And their patient satisfaction scores went back down to baseline and below. So the hospital called us back up and said, you know what, we would like to pay you out of our own budget for you to come to get these scores back up because we know it's in our interest. So the management group, we're just going to go around them. We want to pay you. And we said, sorry, you've missed your opportunity. You can't do it anymore. And they were like, what? We're like, no, totally just kidding. But it'll be twice as much money. And they said, we're asking for the same thing you did before. We said, that's absolutely true. But now you know you need us. Now you know what it's worth. And they said, you're right. And they paid it. And their patient satisfaction scores went back up. And the reason their patient satisfaction scores went back up is because we were aware of something called the Hawthorne effect. Does anyone in here know what the Hawthorne effect is? Yes? Lighting, that's exactly right. It's what's called the measurement effect. So in the 1920s, an electric plant in Illinois wanted to increase their productivity on their factory floor. And so what they thought is, hey, let's turn the lights up. And let's measure it. So they measured their productivity, and then they turned the lights up, and sure enough, working in a brighter lit place, productivity went up. And then 6 months later, it leveled off, and then it fell back down to pre-lighting change conditions. And they thought, well, that's weird. So let's measure the opposite of it just to be sure. So they turned the lights down to below what it was before, and productivity went up and leveled off, and then fell back down. And they thought, what in the hell is going on? So they started a lot of different changes. They took people from the right side of the factory and they moved them to the left side of the factory. They had people work in different ways, and every change they made, productivity went up, leveled off, and came back down. In the 1950s, they named this the Hawthorne effect, or the measurement effect. Anything you try and fix for a short period of time, you will get a bump. If you try and make exceptional patient experience or exceptional client experience for a short period of time, just by the dint of trying something, you're going to have some changes. The key is figuring out how to make it sustainable over the long haul. And what we had that the other company didn't have was a way of putting in place systems. So it's not just the acts, it's not just handing out these business cards, but it's doing it systemically. all the time in a way that works. So what's your plan? What are you going to do to increase your client experience? Anybody know who this guy is? Patton, right? So anyone in here ever play chess? Yes? It's exactly the same thing. These rules are the same in chess, in battle, all the things. Any plan is better than no plan. A good plan now is better than the best plan later. So what's your plan? Everybody at the table, there's something to write on. There's something to write on. There's paper, there's a pen. I want you to take a minute. These are things that we've talked about. It wasn't all that much. We talked about business cards. We talked about proxemics. We talked about where you sit. We talked about handwritten notes, second touch, all these things. I want you to just jot down what you can do right now. Right now. What can you do from this moment forward to increase your client experience? Going out the door. You don't have to go back and think about it when you get back to the office. Do it now. What can you do now? Write down 2, 3 things. One thing's enough. This last question I want to pose to you, though, how will you measure it? How will you know that things have gotten better? Now, it's an interesting question because not everything is measurable. For instance, does having an extra lunch with a client increase the client's experience? Probably. How do you know that it does? Well, maybe you ask them, or maybe you track referrals, or maybe you track something else. Just give some thought to what you're going to do, and 6 months from now, and this is important, not just what you do now, but 6 months from now, how do you check back in and make sure that you're still doing it? I was asked to come here today and explain some ways that we work in the hospitals to help increase client experience. And I'm telling you that one of the keys is to try it and track it. Just to check back in 6 months later. Do anything. The things that I've talked about today are all scientifically proven to work. So I recommend you do that. But take a moment and write down a couple things. Unless, of course, you are one of the 80% of people who doesn't need any help. And I don't have all the answers for you, but I do know that a lot of the things that we do in the hospital, they work. Your job is to be good at your job, but your job is also to create little tiny moments that are exceptional. Little tiny moments that your clients will say, hey, other people don't do that. He answered his mail while he was on vacation. He didn't have to do that. He wrote on the back of his business card a way to get in touch with them, but they didn't have to do that. Every time I go to their office, when I sit and talk to them, I feel like they're really listening to me. They don't have to do that. Those little things make a huge and measurable difference. In the hospitals, it's the difference between millions of dollars per hospital annually. For you, it's the difference between where you are now and where you could be. I listened to your plans this morning about where this firm can go, and it's absolutely true. You can do all the things that you talked about, but you need a plan. And the beauty of what I'm talking about today is these things cost you nothing. Why wouldn't you do them? So this is my challenge to you. Take this, give some thought to it, have a plan, move forward. Thank you very much. Hope that was what you're looking for.
Thanks very much to Aaron. This is the end of the agenda. I know everybody coming down here is a little bit inconvenient. We're all anxious about the fact that there's work that ought to be getting done. We will get back to it and we will get it done. But it's really important for us to